Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to continue a little bit of a recap of some of the old League mechanics that are still relevant in the core Path of Exile game. And today, I want to look at one of the more complex ones, which is Niko and the Delve Mines. Niko is an NPC that will pop up in 2% of zones, starting from Act 4 onwards. He'll always be in the mines the first time you go in there, so that's the third or fourth zone inside Act 4. So the first time you go in there, after you break Desheret's seal, then you'll encounter Niko every time, and then after that you'll find him in about 2% of zones that you enter. And then once you get into maps, you'll be able to force him to appear in maps. He's not that impactful to your gameplay during the leveling experience, and mostly you'll start caring about encountering him once you get into maps. Now, what Niko does is he gives you access to a specific zone called the Azurite mine. And that is a massive sprawling mega dungeon that you can view parts of on the subterranean chart. The subterranean chart is essentially a massive map. Some of the things that might compel you to consider going into the Delve Mines are, firstly, it's a zone with lots of monsters to kill and loot to steal. But there's also a little bit of unique loot that's only available in here. You'll get to encounter Kurgle and Ahumati the Blind, two unique bosses. One of them found in the Val Outpost, and where's the boss? Here's the boss for the Grand Architect's Temple. Drops the unique map Doriani's Machinarium, which is sometimes worth a lot. Usually it's worth about an Exalted Orb, but for most of the Delirium League it was sitting around 15 Exalts. This is a map that is very difficult to get on your Atlas of Worlds, and as a result there's a lot of demand for it for that reason, but it also allows you to build your own unique item, and this unique item it's a customizable unique that's quite powerful, and was extremely good in the Delirium League. So that's Doriani's Machinarium is one of the rewards. Additionally, there is a third boss who goes by the name of All, who is the most lucrative of them all. He's a very difficult boss, unquestionably the hardest in the game at the time of the Delirium League, and he is an absolute brute to kill, but if you do kill him, you will receive one of several different unique items. Some of these are vendor fodder of a different type. They're not useful on their own. They're rings that have very bad stats, but that can be vended in a vendor recipe to get yourself a Precursor's Emblem. And the components for the Precursor's Emblem that drop from All are somewhat precious. Even if you can't use it, someone else will want it in a trade league. And there is the very popular amulet All's Uprising, which makes one of your auras free, alongside having pretty good other stats as well. So these are compelling reasons to come to the Delve Mines for the boss drops. But that's not all there is. The Delve Mines are the best place in the game to get fossils, and almost the only place in the game to get resonators, which are very powerful crafting tools. Even despite some recent nerfs, they remain exceptionally powerful. The Delve Mines also give you a way to push your character against content that gets harder and harder and harder, and harder and harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. So you'll be able to go up to monster level 83, but then also for monsters that continue to scale way beyond that. I want to demonstrate the core gameplay loop of the Delve Mines by taking somewhere that's pretty easy for my character. This is my build at the end of the Delve League, and what I'll do is I'll just run this this zone here to this self-events node. So I'm going to request Niko teleport me here. He will teleport me to the closest completed location, and then there'll be a path that the minecart will follow. So Niko is now sending me into the Azurite mine. This will just give you a sense of the core gameplay loop in the Delve Mines. And we have a load screen, of course. These load screens take a while when recording. So this is the minecart. It is causing a whole lot of light to protect my character, because the darkness is dangerous. I'm just going to stand in the darkness, and you can see that there's this stacking debuff here. I will need to take action, otherwise I will be in real trouble. That stacking debuff that you are seeing inflicts damage over time to you, and it also makes monsters incredibly resilient. I've thrown a flare at my feet. At the start, you'll only have access to a very small number of flares. You can upgrade the number of flares you've got access to. I currently have 16 in the Delirium League, and I think it hard caps at 17 from memory. So again, this flare will expire soon, and here you see this darkness debuff is growing, and my energy shield is draining. Now my life is draining as well, and I'm suddenly in quite a lot of trouble. So I need to get back in the light quickly. This scaling debuff is pretty difficult to endure. It is a percentage of your maximum life plus energy shield, and that means that it scales quite scarily as the zone that you're in gets more. So it scales quite scarily, and it's very difficult to out-tank. Here there's a fractured wall. We'll discuss them later. We'll discuss them in more detail later, but they have a whole bunch of good loot behind them. And they also have a small number of monsters, some of which leave nasty explosions after they are killed. So we'll just make sure that we beat them. And you'll see that I'm going down all these side paths where the cart's not interested in going, and I'm picking up this resource called Azurite. We'll discuss that in a second, but Azurite is what you use to purchase flares. It's also how you can use some various methods to mitigate the damage that the darkness deals, to protect you against that, and also to increase the maximum number of flares that you can carry. So you're going to want to pick up Azurite. If you get too much of it, you can also turn it into resonators, which are used in fossil crafting, and people need heaps of them. So here the cart has finished its progress, and we have an encounter. These encounters vary, and they're dependent upon the look of the zone on the subterranean chart. So this is one of these nodes, nodes that has an Azurite bloom on it. But there are plenty of others. Some of them have a weapon symbol. They'll give you a bit of a sense as to what to expect in the way of loot. And they also have a name that influences what type of encounter spawns here. The Azurite ones are, they're one of two things. They're either a boss encounter that's pretty easy, or they're just a trash encounter like this one. So we're just going to kill all of these monsters, and then we'll talk about Azurite and Sulphite, the two delve-specific resources. These monsters explode on death. There are a lot of on-death explosions in delve mines. You're going to have to be very conscious of those in here. In terms of loot that drops, you'll see that there's a whole lot of small gumball currencies. One thing that I like doing is running a very strict loot filter, but then at the end of one of these zones, hold Alt to override it, and then just start picking up scrolls for personal use. I picked them up here. They're not worth picking up normally, these low value currencies, but they do add up in clusters, and the end of a delve is one of the biggest clusters of loot that you will ever find. As we come back to the delve mine encampment, you'll see here the Voltaxic generator. What this does is it gives you a way to spend that Azurite you've been picking up. All that Azurite is bind to account on equip. Bind to account on acquire. So it immediately goes into this pool, it's vacuumed into this pool, and your other characters can spend it. You can see here that I have the option to craft a flare. And if you hold shift, you'll be able to craft multiple at once. So I just crafted 11 flares, and that cost me 55 Azurite. I'm going to craft 2 dynamite, and that's going to cost me 20 each, so a total of 40. So I only spent 95 Azurite, and you would have noticed in that zone that I got well over 1,000 in total drops, once you count all of the little side paths that I explored. This is important because you have a stat called darkness resistance that only matters in the delve mines. And your darkness resistance starts very low. It will start at 0 when you first enter the delve mines, and that will be at the top of the subterranean chart. So that will be all the way up here. This is when you're in Act 4. You can go into the delve mines straight away then. So this will be at monster level 34, and you will have your darkness resistance set to 0 at this point. Your darkness resistance drops 1% for each point that you proceed down the mine. And so by the time that you get to somewhere like where I was in the video earlier before, which was about 230 depth, or all the way down to say 500 depth, where the encounters start getting a bit harder, at that point you're going to be looking at a negative 500% darkness resistance. You saw how quickly that the darkness was shredding my life total and energy shield with only with plus 75% resistance to it with the cap. So it's something that you're going to want to very, very quickly invest in spending Azurite on increasing your darkness resistance. You also have light resistance, which will decrease the deeper that you get as well. This begins at 100% and will shrink by 2% for each step down in the mine that you take. And so you're going to need to spend Azurite constantly fighting this. It's my recommendation that early on, you spend most but not all of your Azurite. I'll get to the very first things you should purchase separately later with your Azurite. But you're going to want to spend most of your Azurite getting the darkness resistance up to 0 and getting your light radius up to 100% early on. Once you've done both of those, getting your darkness resistance up to 60% or higher will make things a lot more comfortable as well. However, we also have another thing we need to consider, and that is sulphite capacity. So sulphite is the other resource that is required for delving. Azurite is found in the delve mines. Sulphite is what powers the little cart that you follow along. So sulphite is acquired in maps. That's the only way you can get it, is by finding little piles of poo in maps. They actually look like golden poo, and Niko comes along and harvests them whenever he is in the zone. And those will refill this sulphite meter. By default, instead of having, as you can see here, I've got 37,316 out of 55,000. When you start, you'll start with 0 out of 300, and you will be able to increase that cap of 300 by spending Azurite and increasing your sulphite capacity. This is hard capped at 65,000, so nothing you can do will increase it beyond 65,000, and finding Niko in a map will cause you to gain more sulphite. There'll be 3 piles of Niko's poo that he'll harvest. If you're encountering Niko in a yellow map, you can expect each of these piles to be about 600 sulphite. If you're encountering him in a white map, you can expect about 300 per pile. And if you're encountering him in a red map, you can expect much, much, much more. Sulphite scales in odd ways with multiple players. It is generally beneficial to have more people in the instance because the total amount of sulphite that is looted will be higher. However, it will be spread 6 ways. So instead of getting 1 share to yourself, if you've got 6 players in an instance, there'll be 3.5 shares of sulphite, but it'll be spread between 6 of you. Each of you will get a little bit more than half of the normal amount of sulphite. And so if each of you can force Niko onto a map in turn, and you've got 6 players, then you'll wind up getting a lot of sulphite. If each of you open a map with Niko in it, and we'll get to how you get Niko onto a map in a sec, each of you open a map of comparable tier that's got Niko in it, then you will get a lot more sulphite for your Niko mission than you would otherwise get. So in terms of sulphite, you'll need to increase your sulphite cap. I like to do this while I am in early maps. So when I get into white maps, I like to run just enough of the delve mines that my sulphite capacity reaches more than 2,000. And then once I've done that, I don't come back to the delve mines until I'm starting to break into red maps. At the point that I'm starting to break into red maps, then I will try to push it up to 15, 20,000 or more. And then upgrading beyond about 30,000 is luxury upgrades for later in the league when you really don't care and you've got Azurite to burn. Because these later upgrades cost a lot. 54,709 Azurite is a lot of Azurite to spend. All of this time, I want to keep my darkness resistance and light radius up with where the cart is. So, in terms of the other things to note about the subterranean chart, you'll notice that there are different areas that look different in terms of colors. So this here is blue. This here is blue, and it has the name Frozen Hollow for these zones. This area is a sort of darkish grey, and it is called Petrified Forest. This is a sort of greyish purple called Fungal Caverns. There's a magma fissure, and there's a couple of other biomes as well. Sulfur vents, and there's 3 different cities. These will influence the type of monsters and encounters that you'll find in there. So I'm going to jump into a frozen hollow just to give you a bit of an example here. This is the cold biome, and in a lot of leagues, the frozen hollow is the most lucrative to run. However, I'm not going to guarantee that that's going to be the case in the league that you're playing in at the time that you watch this video. So you'll see that there's a lot of monsters that are cold themed, including some that have some nasty explosions after they die that I have to get the hell out of. There's a lot of monsters in the delves that explode on death, and I'm running through this. If you're curious, I'm running this on a cast on critical strike assassin that is fairly geared, but not extraordinarily so. It's the level 95 character that I was running in the Delirium League, and this is a jewelry themed. This is a jewelry themed rewards cluster. You'll see that there's a node there named Eldritch.your. That will have an Elder belt probably, but if I'm lucky, it might be a ring or an amulet. So there's a belt. Abandoned rings will just be rare rings, pretty low quality. I'm running a strict loot filter, so you won't see much here, but there's a good chance of getting good things here. The node that you want, the thing you want to see the most in a jewelry node is a node called Light Jewelry, which is divination cards related to jewelry. So that's the frozen biome. The frozen biome is a straightforward layout and also has some special rewards. Sanctified fossils that drop there, frigid fossils drop there, although they tend to be pretty cheap, and serrated fossils. Serrated fossils being the big one. They allow you to re-roll a rare item, so like a chaos orb, but with a strong bias towards attack rolls and against spellcaster rolls, which can be really good for crafting physical damage weapons and a few other things as well. In terms of the other biomes of note, the fire biome is of interest because it can drop enchanted fossils. Enchanted fossils are something that, as long as the labyrinth enchant system remains anything remotely resembling what it has been, or like what it was at inception, there will be a demand for enchanted fossils, and they will be valuable. In fact, they will be tremendously underrated early on in a league. So if you're looking to pick up an item that will increase in value as the league continues, then enchanted fossils are a good one. They drop mostly in the magma biome, alongside a number of others. There are scorch fossils, there are pristine fossils, and prismatic fossils also drop there. Again, very, very solid crafting implements that you will probably use a lot of if you ever get into crafting. Additionally, there are some specific nodes that are very, very, very juicy, and you can tell them by their icons. So, the icon gives that you see here gives a very quick, I guess, high-level overview of what you can expect to find there. So this is Azurite. This is more Azurite, because you can see that there's one clump here, two clumps here. This is even more Azurite, and that will have a harder encounter than the 1 and the 2 versions will have. This will be armor, which will generally be junk. This will be weapons, which will generally be junk. This is just random items, again, not very good. This one here is breach themed, and you'll actually get to the end and find a breach to encounter. These are not particularly sought after, but they can be a little bit of fun as you get deeper and the encounters get harder. However, the icons you want to look for are things like fossils. Fossils can be particularly valuable. Not so much this one. This one's named Smuggler's Stash. If you find a fossil node and it has a name that is not Smuggler's Stash, it is very worth going out of your way to path towards in the Delve Mines. Additionally, there's things like this Renegade Camp, which contains chaos items. It contains some rare items that you wouldn't normally be able to get. Things that you might overrate, currency ones tend not to be very good. They're not terrible, they're worth doing if they're on your path, but they're not worth pathing far out of your way for. Additionally, the bosses are very, very, very worth doing, although which ones are worth doing can vary from league to league. And yeah, there's also always just lots of XP to be had in the Delve Mines as well. You'll burn more sulphite the deeper that you get. And it can be a balancing act between how deep do I want to go? Do I want the higher rewards that are available deeper in the mines? Or do I want the easier completions that are found earlier and the lower sulphite costs? My general recommendation here is that if your character is powerful enough to speed clear tier 16 maps, you want to push down to at least depth 300. Once you get to depth 300, and the depths just increase by 1 for each level down the grid that you go, so 311, also 311 because it's in line with this, 312, 313, 314, and so on and so forth. Each level that you go down, the monsters get a little bit scarier. I think they get 1% increased damage, 1% increased life, or something like that. It's slower to build up to that point, so that's what they eventually start gaining. But the deeper that you go, the more common that the precious nodes, like Grand Architect's temples and the All's equivalent, the Crystal King's throne, these start becoming more common, and the less precious nodes, like your jewelry nodes, like your weapons nodes, become more infrequent. You'll also start seeing some of the weird and wonderful nodes, like the Harbinger nodes. The Harbinger nodes are pretty good just from an XP perspective, so they're a little bit of an oddball in that case. So there's lots of loot to be had in the Delve Mines. If your character can speed clear tier 16 maps, then you want to push to 300 depth or deeper. And if you can go miles deeper, miles deeper, you'll start to find that once you get past 1,000 depth, which I don't have any characters in this league that have gotten near, once you get to 1,000 depth, you will start finding it's much more frequent to get the ultra rare nodes. These nodes drop things like fractured fossils that are incredibly rare and incredibly powerful crafting items, that sometimes these fossils can be more than an exalted orb each in trade, and there's insatiable demand for them in large quantities as well. In terms of how you get yourself sulphite, I've already mentioned that you'll find Niko in 2% of your maps. You also will have your master missions. With sulphite scales on a couple of axes. The first one is the tier of the map that you encounter Niko in. If you encounter Niko in a tier 1 map, you will get a lot less sulphite than if you encounter him in a tier 13. If you encounter him in a high tier map, each tier that the map goes up, the amount of sulphite that he creates will increase by about 7%. So you will expect a baseline sulphite amount. From recollection, in tier 15s, it's 1,209 is the baseline. There'll be some variance around that. And in tier 16, it's 1,290. These are data mine numbers, and the amount that you actually get in game will vary with 2 factors. Firstly, there's just a little bit of jitter that's applied to this, so instead of getting 1,209 every time, you might get 1,100 one time and then 1,320 the next. There is a degree of randomness. I'm not sure how significant that is. And then additionally, the quantity that is on the map itself is a factor. So let's just grab a tier 16 map for example here. You'll see here that this map has no quantity on it. This map also has none. Let's have a look for one that's got a small amount. This map has 35 item quantity on it. This map has 104%. The amount that quantity amps up your sulphite is widely believed to be 75% of the quantity bonus on the map. So here you'll get baseline sulphite. Here you will get baseline plus 3/4 of 35%. So we'll call that 27% increased sulphite. So you get 127% of baseline. Here you will get 3/4 of 104%. So you'll get 78% increased sulphite for a total of 178% of your base sulphite. For that reason, it's pretty good to, if you're going to try and spawn Niko in a map, it's a pretty good idea to run a juicy map like this one rather than a boring map like this or a scoured map like this. Additionally, in addition to this, there's a couple of ways you can get Niko to spawn on a map when it's not his turn. So, you know, when you don't win that 2% die roll. One of them is to burn a master mission on him. So that's as simple as just going to the map device, and then when you put in that primordial blocks, and you click here so that it uses up a Niko mission. The second way that you can cause Niko to spawn in a map is by using a Sulphite Scarab. There are 3 tiers of Sulphite Scarabs. Rusted Sulphite Scarabs forces Niko to appear in the map and grants you as the map owner 20% more Sulphite. Polished, it forces Niko in and 40% more, and Gilded forces Niko in with 60% more Sulphite. If you have access to both Master Missions and also Scarabs, what I suggest that you do is use your Master Missions when in a party, and use your Sulphite Scarabs when you are playing solo. That is assuming that you are interested in using Niko both solo and in a party. It's pretty much always better to force Niko onto a map when you're in a group, as long as there's reciprocal arrangement between all the players in it, as you'll get more Sulphite overall. But that's not always an option, and when it's not, what you want to do is to get the most benefit out of that 20, 40, or 60% more multiplier by picking out and claiming it yourself. The next important thing that needs to be said about the Delve mines is the previously alluded to grid nature of the mines. The Delve mines is fundamentally a grid, and you can see this by looking at the biome barriers. So you can see here that the line between these fungal caverns here and the magma fissure is a vertical line, and that continues all the way up here. The whole of the subterranean chart is a grid, and these are the unit cells of it. Every unit cell contains one of 2 things, assuming that you can path through it. So some of them you can't path through at all. Be one of 2 things. Either it will contain an encounter. These ones sort of stand out, they're obvious. This one here is an encounter. This self-event is the encounter for this cell. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. It has this wretched camp in it. This infested thicket is for this petrified forest square. It is the encounter. The other possibility is it can have a fractured wall. These fractured walls are juicy. They hold some of the best loot that you will find inside the Delve mines. And they can offer one or 2 things in them. Either they will contain a sort of hidden bunch of chests, like we just demonstrated earlier in one of the earlier sections that I ran through, or they can contain a path to one of these hidden zones. You'll see here that this Azurite fissure is not connected to anything. That means that it is accessible, but the only way to access it is through a hidden path. What I want to do now is demonstrate how you get to that. So I can tell you from experience that it will be from this. It will be connected from here, and there will be a hidden wall off to the left of this encounter node, and then it will come down to here. I want to talk about how that works. So the pathing inside the Delve mines is set up in such a way that every single encounter has 1, 3, or 4 nodes coming out of it. And you can see here that there's only 2 visible nodes coming out of this one, and that means that it is the exception. It is the unusual one, and therefore it has an additional path, one that we can't see. So without anything further, let's go and actually path to this through the mines. So I'm going to run this delve, burning 2,859 sulphite to do so. I won't do any of the side quests along the way. I'm just going to rush to the end of it. And then once we've done that, I'll be able to demonstrate where that wall is in practice. In order to find fractured walls, you will always need to have flares and dynamite. At the start of your delving career, you'll have a maximum of 3 flares. Maybe it's 3 flares, maybe it's 5. It's a very small amount, and a maximum of, if I remember right, 2 dynamite. So you'll want to increase those pretty quickly, and that costs you Azurite to do so. That was my silly incubator. I forgot about that thing. One more thing is that the cart speed scales with your movement speed. So I'm used to using my Quicksilver Flask sparingly on this character and flame dashing around for speed. But actually in here, because I just want to get to the end as quickly as possible, I'm limited by the speed of the cart, and the cart speed is based upon mine. It's a percentage of your maximum speed. So as long as I've got a Quicksilver Flask active, it will speed up for me. It will speed up if you're ahead of it, and it will slow down if you're behind it, and watch out for flame bearers because they're very dangerous in here. This is essentially, this is only just in the monster level 83 areas. Ooh, that was nasty. So this is essentially no different really to a tier 16 map, and it has pretty easy mods. As you can see in the top left corner of the screen, we've got Scorching Ground, we have Bloodlines, and that's it. So it's like a magic map. A magic tier 16 map still, but that's pretty easy. And here we go with the encounter. This will be 6 Rogue Exiles, which will die very easily. Rogue Exiles haven't coped well with the amount of power creep players have gotten access to as the game has gotten older. Unfortunately, we've got a Corrupting Blood pack here that is not wanting to die. Now, one thing that's important that I didn't pick up while I was fighting those monsters, I realized only afterwards, was that those monsters there were being protected by the fact that they were in the darkness and that they were far from the light. So, having another look here, you'll see that we're at an area that's got 2 visible exits, and therefore I've concluded that it will be to the left. So we're going to have a look around us for a path that we could take. Pressing V brings up the map, and you'll be able to fire off your flares. Oh, just found a fossil instead. You can check the map again and just have a look around to see. It will be off to the left somewhere, but it may be past the goal of the node. Again, I'm being forced to throw flares just in order to stay alive. Otherwise, the darkness will prevent me from being able to kill any monsters. And we're actually not finding the zone. You'll see that I actually just followed the entire next path along. Where I think the path is going to be from here. It'll be off to the left. So I've got to retrace my steps further than I expected. This is actually an exact science of sorts, but it's a tricky one, and it's one that's easy to get things wrong on. So, oh no, that's not correct. This might be a very unusual niche case, which is always funny. And in fact, what I think is happening here is that the reason I'm not finding what I'm looking for is that I've just done a very, very long path through the Delve Mines. So I'm going to reset the instance and then have another look at this. This will be interesting. If this turns out to be one of the very rare corner cases, that will be fascinating. So, this was a very long path. I think we've just got one of the rarest cases in the Delve Mines. This might actually be one of the very rare case where you can have a path that is 6 long. That has only 2 exits. I'm going to jump into the mines again. Now, the Delve Mines will reset every time that you exit an instance, so I can't get back into the instance I was in before. And at this point, I'm going to have a look and see if I can path the way that I wanted to now by retracing my steps. Okay, so this is the line where you change from one grid node to the next. It should be somewhere in this node that there'll be a path off to the left that will take us where we want to go. And that's what I'm going to try and find. However, I'm going to check everywhere else around as well, because there is another hypothesis. Okay, now I am in a different square of the Delve Mines. What this means is that actually the node that I chose was a corner case. And I'll explain what's happened there as soon as we've done this node, because it's one that I was going to explain, but I wasn't expecting it to be the first time. So let's just blitz down this encounter. It would be really easy. This build has only been moderately powerful, but it has just been so satisfying to play because there is so much crap that appears all over the screen, and that's fun. Alright, now we have the final encounter done there. Collect all the loot that we care about, and we shall zap back to the beginning. And what's happened here is that this is the node that has the secret out of it. This node is going to be a 4-way node that's not visible. This was originally generated randomly as a single path. However, the delve mines break. There is a limit to how long a path can be, beyond which they simply don't function. And this was bisected because of that. This means that the correct path to get to this node will instead be from here through a secret wall from here. What I will do though is I'll go in here and demonstrate what fractured walls look like and what sort of loot you can find behind them. So we're going to follow the path back, and when we get into a new zone, as you see here, this zone we haven't found a fractured wall in. There will be exactly one in here in normal circumstances, like this should be, and so it'll be off the path somewhere. We're going to have a look for it. We're going to use the mini-map in order to decide where this might be, and we'll also just pick up some random loot while we're on the way. All the loot in this zone will disappear when the fractured wall has been collected. Or when I say disappear, it will still be there until you leave the instance, but then it will never regenerate. Here's the fractured wall. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a dynamite at it, and there'll be a small amount of monsters behind it, including some that will explode after death. In fact, there's pretty much always explosions on death in them, even if you don't get a bearer pack like that one. These contain several different nodes. Fossil nodes are really juicy. The nodes that you saw there, the hidden wealth, are not. The really big ones though, there is a node that is called hidden opulence that you'll find a little bit less than 1% of the time behind those fractured walls. They will contain a top tier currency item. So that will be a divine orb or an annulment orb if you're unlucky, and an exalted orb if you're lucky, a mirror of Kalandra if you are extraordinarily lucky. You will also find clusters of 4 fossils, such as sometimes you'll find things like 3 enchanted fossils and one other fossil, like a scorch fossil, or 3 pristine fossils and a prismatic, or even sometimes 5 fossils total. You'll find some uncommon fossils behind there, like sanctified fossils, and you will also find one node called hidden heirlooms, which will contain a time-worn unique, which again can be a headhunter and therefore is rare and pretty valuable. So those are always worth looking for. Additionally, you can find the pathways through to nodes like this one, although I can't demonstrate that here. Anyways, I think at this point I've covered the reasons that you might want to come into the delve mines. It's access to lots and lots of monsters. It's access to lots and lots of loot, including some unique stuff. The one that I didn't mention is the city nodes, which have lost a bit of their luster in recent patches, but are still pretty good. Nodes like this abyssal chamber here will contain... These start becoming not common, but not super rare either, when you get to about depth 200. And they often contain, or they contain chests at the end, which often contain large numbers of maps. So I might just quickly go and run this one. Just to give you a sense, all 3 types of cities are quite similar to each other. They have different monsters, but the encounters are otherwise basically the same. They are quite a bit harder than other zones of equal level. So whilst that shouldn't be a problem here for me on a solidly endgame character running what's essentially a blue tier 16 map in difficulty, you will find that some of these can be much harder than this one. We'll just see if anything drops. Now you get access to this abyssal chamber, and that's the reward. These have their own sort of unusual mechanics where the light works differently. There are 2 ways you can get light down here. You can either bring your own, in the form of flares, or you can stand on these little things on the ground, which will cause ancient lights to light up. Those ancient lights are time limited, and so this is one of them here. Once you've stood on it long enough, you'll have enough light to hopefully see everything you want to see. That was a map node. Those used to be worth a lot more than they are now, just with the way that the game has changed over recent leagues. Access to the highest level content now is gated behind Cirrus Watchstones rather than being gated behind map acquisition. And so the maps that you actually find will be capped at tier 16, which was the highest cap when Delve, which was the cap when Delve was launched. But nowadays, that maps cap out at tier 19. That's sort of no longer the top tier of maps like it used to be. You'll notice that even though I've been running, sort of 150 depths deeper than this through most of the league, I am needing to be a bit careful here. I'm not able to just stand toe-to-toe and face tank everything. And as I try to do that there, I take a lot of damage. Just going to stand here until the lights have fully generated themselves, and then we'll go and collect the rest of the loot. These cities, in addition to having the loot that you see, lots and lots and lots of different clusters of loot. This will be corrupted maps, which can be... that one will be bricked, because it's white and it's corrupted. There's also some rare nodes that will be that are very valuable in these, but that you'll almost never see. And there's lots and lots of monsters to kill for XP. But with map drops having had their value indirectly nerfed, those cities are not as lucrative as they used to be. Anyways, I think I'm going to leave it there. I think that covers all of the key points about the Delve mines. Why you want to go in there, it's because they drop loot, including uniques you can't get anywhere else in the game. How you go about progressing down the Delve mines, it's just as simple as keep running, keep working your way down, following the paths. How you find fractured walls and why you might want to look behind them. And additionally, the sulphite system and the Azurite system. I'm just going to finish off by replenishing my flares and my dynamite, something you always want to do. And also you want to keep in mind that there's a number of different upgrades I didn't really cover. I covered darkness resistance and light resistance. Light radius, they're the main ones. Flare light radius is important, flare duration is important, and you want to upgrade these. I tend to cap out my flare duration. I'm pretty happy with 16 flares. Dynamite you can upgrade. I really don't bother with it. Some people like using dynamite offensively as a weapon against some of the bosses deep in the Delve mines. I've never really done that. They've had success with it. They find it worthwhile. I haven't, so make up your decision yourself. But I think that upgrading dynamite beyond just getting five charges is one of the sort of vanity upgrades that you don't really need. Anyways, I can leave it there. If you've got comments or questions, fire away below. I am intending to try to put out a beginner-oriented guide to Betrayal at some point. However, I will say that Betrayal has a lot of nuances that I'm not going to get into covering in depth. So if you're looking for more information on min-maxing Betrayal, if you already understand the basics, there's a few other guides around by Twitch streamer Zizaran and by Twitch streamer Cute Dog that are worth a look. I certainly learnt a lot from those. Anyways, leaving it there. Have a good one.